Hello, everyone. My name is Jane Adams. I'm a second-year PhD student at Northeastern University, and I'm so delighted to be kicking off IEEE VIS 2022 Alt Viz workshop this morning, and really glad to be here. So this is our second year running the Alt Viz workshop. Our first year was last year at VIS 2021. And prior to that, we had organized at VIS 2020 the FailFest workshop, which was a celebration of failure in visualization research and kind of encouraging people to publish negative results. So the motivation behind AltViz was to give a platform that could give us some space to present things that maybe wouldn't normally be accepted to the IEEE VIS main conference track, but still have a lot of value for our community. This was in part inspired by the Alt-Chi workshop, which some of you may be familiar with. The question was sort of what kind of work might cause the field to rethink its priorities or ways of operating, and what work might highlight underexplored or neglected areas of visualization, study, or application. As per Kant, what would interrupt our dogmatic slumber and stir us into action? So I'd like to thank all of my co-organizers, Lonnie Bezunson, Daria Akbaba, Andrew McNutt, Arnaud Prozo, and Charles Perrin for helping to co-organize this event. All of their contact information is on our website. So some of the criteria that we had in our call for proposals was provocations, manifestos, or other critiques of visualization research and practice, creative and thought-provoking presentations of data, especially unconventional data, either as traditional visualizations or as multimedia presentations or artworks, and novel and unconventional visualization techniques or design processes. And I think actually that we saw examples of all of these in our submissions this year. They run the gamut from the serious and critical to the hilarious and interesting. And so I think you'll be really entertained by kind of the full range of submissions that we have for AltViz this year. We had 13 total submissions, and we accepted 8 of those submissions this year. Submissions were evaluated on clarity, novelty, and their ability to promote productive thought and discussion for the AltViz audience. The purpose of this venue is to provide a place for works that fall outside the purview of the main Viz paper program. So we did consider not accepting submissions that would be more at home in the main track. So we really wanted to make sure that AltViz remains alt. We actually ask all our reviewers to check off a box that this submission is sufficiently weird that it couldn't be accepted to the main conference. And this year, for the first time, we decided to use Open Review as our reviewing platform. So each submission got at least 2 original reviews and then 1 additional meta review. Although because of the Open Review platform and the ability for people to kind of sign up for anything that they wanted to review, we had some papers that had quite a few more reviews than just the minimum 2 that we required. In addition, the AltViz workshop is Plan S compliant, and all of the proceedings are archived on HAL. And I'm very grateful to my co-organizers for really spearheading that effort towards promoting open science at Viz. And it's something that we feel strongly we would like to see throughout the entire IEEE Viz conference. So we have a pretty full schedule this morning with, as I mentioned, quite a range of submissions. So we have divided it up into kind of 3 sections that are loosely thematically related papers. So the first session, which will be presented by Daria, has 2 papers, one from Joe Wood and another from Vincent Casamayu. The second session, thinking about visions for and from the future, will be presented by Arnaud. and has 3 papers, one about a future of VIS under Plan S, another about data alchemy, a mnemonic manifesto, and another manifesto or paper about creating manifestos on visualization, empowerment, and teaching and learning. Then we'll break for coffee, and then our third session will be about playful tricks in Viz in unexpected places, presented by Andrew, featuring the worst graph layout algorithm ever, paper name which could be automatically generated, and closing out with Ready Player Viz, player-created strategic visualizations for video games. So we have a full schedule here, and we're really excited to be presenting these works, and we really hope that you will all be engaged, whether in person or online, through asking questions in Slido, posting on Twitter if you're in the Twitterverse, and just generally enjoying the first official day of Viz. So some housekeeping things. First, whether you're online or in person, we ask that you please ask your questions on Slido. This is helpful from an accessibility standpoint also. So even though for those of you who are in person, as we're coming back from the pandemic era, it's really exciting to be able to ask your questions in person. We ask you to be cognizant of the fact that we do have a lot of participants online. And so for everyone to be asking questions in Slido, that just ensures that everyone hears the question as well as the answer. And for virtual attendees, when you go to Slido, we are in room Oklahoma Station 7. I realize not everyone uses QR codes, so these links are also on our website, altviz.github.io. And this year, thanks to Daria, we also have Alt Bingo. So if you'd like to participate, you can generate your own AltViz bingo board by visiting the link on our website or scanning this QR code. And you can generate your own custom AltViz bingo. And we encourage you to shout out in the Discord channel or in person if you get bingo throughout the proceedings today. Also, please feel free to share your favorite papers with us on Twitter at AltViz Workshop. And with that, I will hand it off to Daria to start us off with the first session.
Thank you, Jane. Hi, and welcome to the portion of the workshop that we are calling Iris, a journey from the garden to the sky. Like Jane said, my name is Daria. I am calling in from Norrköping, Sweden, and I'm excited to share these 2 papers that explore the affective future potentials of visualization. Our first speaker is Joe Wood. Joe is a professor of visual analytics at the GI Center at the City University London. He is presenting his work, Beyond the Walled Garden, a visual essay in 5 chapters.
I'm going to make the argument that we're remarkably unambitious in academic data visualization, that we sit comfortably in a walled garden occupying only a tiny part of the design landscape. And I'm going to argue that new AI technologies, as flawed as they are prompting new possibilities to vastly increase the data visualization design options available to us. And to develop this argument, I want to identify 2 core concepts to the way that we conceive of visualization design. John McKinley was the first, I think, to relate the ideas of visual language expressiveness and effectiveness to data viz design. And I want to frame those 2 ideas in an information theoretic context. The idea of coding and decoding a visual message. We can think of visualization expressiveness as the vocabulary, the grammar, the idioms that we have at our disposal to encode a message visually. That message is likely to be driven by the data available to us, but also the intent we have as designers. And more expressive visualization gives us greater precision and freedom to relate that message visually. On the other hand, the effectiveness of a visualization characterizes our ability to decode a visual message. It describes how well we've understood the message encoded by the designer. It's important to recognize that while this might be dominantly about understanding the encoded data, it will also include understanding the designer's intent that might transcend any of the details of the data themselves. And one way we might choose to characterize progress in our discipline is that over the years, perhaps we've seen an increase in both the expressiveness and effectiveness of the designs that we create. Michael Carell, I think, will talk more about this in the Believe workshop tomorrow. And yet the way we evaluate expressiveness and effectiveness has severely constrained the scope of our data viz designs. I'd argue that Bertin's contribution to design was to consider it as something that can be atomized, that can be separated into retinal variables, that could be applied to what McKinley talked about as locatable objects in our visualizations. In other words, they both argue that good design can be achieved through atomizing, isolating design choices. And for decades, academic visualization has attempted to evaluate the effectiveness of visualization via these discrete atomized design choices. We might ask ourselves, how is the magnitude of these two numbers understood by looking at these two differently sized circles, for example? Yet, on the other hand, artists often strive to make more holistic expressive communication, conveying subtlety and complexity and emotion and contradiction, quite different to the simplicity of encoding magnitude or identity through simple visual channels. And this leads us to a fundamental design tension. Do we keep our design simple, using well-understood graphical conventions that maximize the effectiveness of our visualizations? Or do we allow more expressive visual designs that have a richer set of visual encodings and information content to maximize expressiveness? This isn't, of course, a binary choice, and it's one that exists on a continuum. Yet I argue in academic visualization and much of practice, we are drawn to that kind of effective end of that spectrum, because that's where we feel most comfortable. And AI image generation tools, I think, are about to change all that. Like everything you can see in this presentation, they open up new paths to follow in this design landscape. Why? Because they don't simplify design into a tiny number of retinal variables attached to discrete, locatable objects. Rather, just like artists, they create this combinatorial explosion of numerous minute design choices to create a whole that's somehow greater than some of its parts. And they remind us in data visualization that we've barely explored that terrain of design possibility. Is this data visualization? What if we shape the design of what we see to reflect sentiment, for example? What would this image look like if it was increasingly angry and fearful? Or what if our images became calmer or more tranquil? Or what if we can easily generate visualizations that sit in that space between abstract and figurative symbolization, like a map that looks like the geology it depicts? What if we represent multivariate data not with abstract Chernoff faces, but with more figurative depictions? What if we create multivariate glyphs that are somehow richer, more memorable? Ones that begin to take on a richer inner life of their own, that convey the character and complexities of information in new ways. We mustn't forget that visualization is essentially a human process. It's one that recognizes and embraces complexity and subtlety, and one that requires a human perspective to make meaningful. And expressiveness should reflect that. It's a key to connecting with the human perspective, even if it comes with an effectiveness cost. I think we'll never be able to make the visual truly effective in McKinley's sense of the word, because at the heart of visualization is a need to express concepts like ambiguity or multiple interpretations and the melding of what we see with what we've experienced. We need the courage, I think, to leave our walled garden, to explore new design landscapes. And perhaps these new AI image generating technologies will inspire us to go wandering.
And while we wait for some questions, I really wanted to ask, where did the inspiration for Beyond the Walled Garden come from?
Yeah, good question. I think this is something that's kind of emerged for a while, and that is this idea that there's the kind of VIS arts corner of what we do, and then there's this very sort of technical visual variables corner of what we do. And I've been struggling for years thinking, if I had the skills to be able to move in that artistic direction, I'd feel I could do a lot more with VIS. And these new technologies have kind of allowed that to happen. So I kind of felt constrained. And so that metaphor of the walled garden, I think, was really just an expression of that slight frustration that I personally have, but also I think that we have as a discipline, which is that we are quite limited, I think, in our design thoughts when we're thinking about communicating information visually.
Yeah, everything seems to be in a box. We have a question on Slido. As someone who argues for more expressiveness, how do you see the discussions on chart junk fitting in?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, Tufte provoked quite a lot of a backlash with the idea of calling it chart junk. It's obviously a kind of value judgment about
We're having some technical difficulties. Please bear with us while we get them addressed. They'll be ready in a moment. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so Tufte, yeah, so I think, clearly there are forms of expression that can be distracting, and they can cloud the message. So, I don't think it's necessarily the case that anything that is non-data related is necessarily enhancing our ability to communicate. But it's not a binary decision, is it? I don't think it's a question of being able to label things as junk or not. I do think we should be thinking of data visualization as more than just showing the numbers, and therefore we should be thinking about these other forms of visual expression.
Great. So our next question is, how can the decoding / understanding of such novel designs be supported? Interesting question. A limited set of retinal channels, et cetera, become conventions in a way that can be learned more easily with complete freedom. Design, this is harder. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's that's a challenge for art generally, isn't it? I mean, how much should we be educated in the conventions and the histories of visual depiction in order to generate as much value as we can when we see them? In a way, I think that artists will often acknowledge that people aren't necessarily going to be able to decode in the same way. And, I think that is part of the potential power of being able to show ambiguity, is the fact that we might have different interpretations. We bring different histories, we bring different sets of skills. Clearly in the data viz realm, we're very focused on educating and evaluating particular conventions. But I think we have the scope to think much more widely about how other people have communicated visually, and learn from that, which is why I like the VIS program, for example, in this conference, because it is exploring that space and that history of communication.
Great. I think we have time for just one more question, if we can fit this in. And it goes sort of in line with what you were saying. Do you have thoughts on how we could approach evaluation methods as we move away from maybe this more atomic visualization method? Yeah.
I mean, that's quite a fundamental question for data viz, isn't it? Because you've got this kind of very controlled environment of the sort of experimental tradition where you try to isolate and remove confounders, which allows you to evaluate with precision, but only a very tiny space of what we perceive. And so I think the idea of kind of in situ evaluation and understanding that these are more complex interactions with our histories and personal perspectives is something we should just be recognizing as a valid way of exploring how effective and expressive we can be in our communication.
That's wonderful. There are more questions on Slido, and I'm sure there will be more conversation on Discord. Thank you so much for your paper. And for those who haven't looked at it, it's beautiful. It's like reading a storybook about visualization. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
So our next talk is by Vincent Kazamayu, who's a PhD student and part of the Potiok team at INRIA. Vincent presents Ride Your Data, Raise Your Arms, Scream, and Experience Your Data from a Roller Coaster Cart. Vincent, the floor is yours.
Okay, I just need to share my screen. Okay, are we good? So, hi everyone. I'm Vincent Kazamayu, and I will present to you Ride Your Data, a new way to experience your data from a roller coaster cart in VR. It's a work that I made with Ivan Jensen, Pierre Lagisevich, and Arno Puzo. So to introduce you to the concept, I will invite you to make a tour to the Ride Your Data theme park and see what's hiding behind all the elements. And so let's start first with the museum. So virtual reality enabled new way to explore data, but the focus was mostly done on the visual representation of it and not on the experience in itself. With Ride Your Data, we would like to take a step in that direction by proposing a new way to explore data on a roller coaster cart with virtual reality. Roger Kenny and Anna Asnes-Becker did a similar thing with NASDAQ visualization in the evolution of NASDAQ on a roller coaster. And we were inspired by this work to design our own while focusing more on the adaptability and the immersion. So talking about design, let's head now for the factory to see what's hiding behind the roller coaster. So it's run on Unity and is using the ETK plugin to display visualization directly in the Unity editor. And so the user can input his own data file, and then ETK will generate a bar chart that will be used as pylons for the roller coaster. Then we create a Bezier curve, which we can adjust if two close points have a high variation between them in order to avoid the card being upside down and the rider spilling a freshly bought latte on a visitor. We then create a loop between the last and the first points to allow the rider to make multiple laps and have an overview of the visualization. And using the Unity physics system, speed is simulated, meaning that the cart accelerates on downhill slope and can be towed on uphill slope. The cart possesses a screen where the rider can follow his progression on a line chart, and that also displays the current X and Y value he is currently going through. Also, we made a virtual companion named Remy, which is on the ride with you and that reacts according to what's happening on the tracks. Okay, now that we have saw how it works, I can now put on my rider hat and start with the first roller coaster of the day. And it's about Narwhal, which is the Narwhal ride about the mercury exposure in Narwhal Tusk between 1961 and 2010. And so it's a good data set to start because we have only small variation until the end of the curve, where actually we have a big slope due to ice melting releasing mercury into the air in 28. As you can see on the preview, we decided to include an environment for the dataset to try out the immersion, even if it's not really related to the data, apart from the waters for the narwhals. We can move on to our second roller coaster of the day, which is Child Story, and is about the child mortality percentage in Sweden for the past 2 centuries. And so here we have a much more disturbing ride with a lot of variation at high speed to start until the 20th century, where things begin to decrease, and the 50s, where it stabilizes for good. For the dataset, we include an environment that's related to the data as the roller coaster takes place as a toy in a child's home. And for our final dataset of the day is CryptoRoll, which is about the Bitcoin, the evolution of Bitcoin value between January 2017 and November 2018. And here you could think that it's a pretty simple curve with only one slope at a Bitcoin explosion. But actually, it's the one that required us an extra step to be able to ride. Because as you can see on the raw data, there was a lot of variation between close points. And so to make the ride much smoother, we decided to post-process it, but still maintaining the general shape of the curve. And finally, we decided to not include any environment at all to try out if it impacts the immersion on it. Okay, we can now slow down and rest a bit and discuss what question could be interesting to explore now with rider data. And the first thing is the rider understanding of data, how well we can formally assess how the data are perceived, what type of data could be difficult now to visualize on a roller coaster. A second question would be how the emotion correlates with the dataset evolution. For example, for the child mortality dataset, a downhill slope can be seen as a positive event, but for Bitcoin value, it can be seen as a negative event. And if you are on a roller coaster in real life, you will only feel one set of emotion on a downhill slope and not two different. For the other experiment, the final question would be, is the good environment important or not to the immersion and to the impact on the visualization? And we began to try out things with the different environments. If we talk now about the data analysis process, what could be done to improve it? The first thing would be to control the speed during the roller coaster, something that is not really possible in real life, but here it could be interesting to slow down or stop at the points that you want to visualize and fast forward some others. Also, being able to visualize multiple datasets at the same time could be interesting. For example, for the child mortality dataset, being able to compare multiple countries and choose which one to ride or not could be interesting. And finally, being able to share the experience with other riders by riding with other peoples could bring out new point of discussion for the data. That's it for our tour in the Radio Data theme park. I hope you enjoyed the ride. I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Sending you claps. Thank you so much for that lovely presentation. While we're waiting for questions to come through Slido, I have a question for you about the decision to incorporate a preview of the chart in the roller coaster. For me, the fun part about a roller coaster is not knowing what's next. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the interplay between the real world experience of a roller coaster and then also some of the design decisions you made for your virtual roller coaster ride.
Actually, we made the decision. You talk about the visualization in the cart, so the line chart. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
We made this decision because even if the fun part of a roller coaster is not knowing exactly what will happen, but to actually have some kind of data sense, like knowing exactly where you are on the curve, it's actually important to not confuse too much riders about what they are currently seeing, and to have some kind of information. And also it was a thing that we did to also prevent if the rider knows what's happening, he will maybe have less motion sickness, or on a part where there is a lot of variation, because he can prepare mentally for it.
Okay, yes, this makes a lot of sense. So we have a question on Slido that says, I wondered about why the roller coaster only traveled in one dimension, which you do talk about in your paper, but maybe you can speak to that a little bit more. And if there are other types of data you might be able to include by having a loop or a twist.
So for the multiple dimension, actually, it's something that it's possible. We can integrate, for example, a second dimension on data, but we didn't find any data that actually was relevant to ride with the third dimension. And we were focused on time-based data, but actually, about having a loop, something like this, it would require a very specific data, which is something that might exist and that we could implement or test out. But to have really a more general approach and to being able to have the most data set that we can input, we had to at least for this presentation limits to the first two dimension. And about having loops, and it's something that we thought about, but we didn't find any way to add it and have meaning. I mean, without really actually. Like we could have put a loop at some point on the data, like the highest point will always be a loop, something like this. But we decided to stay the most as possible focused on the transition between the curve and what we gonna ride.
Yeah, it seems like maybe seasonality or some sort of repetition in the data could eventually be presented as a loop. We do have another question from the audience asking about whether or not you plan to expand to other rides. So, for example, a pie chart for Ferris wheels or something.
I actually making a full theme park with a lot of different attractions could be a real. I think that's really interesting to do. A pie chart for Ferris wheel is actually a good idea. We would have to think about what all the possibility, but there is a design space that we can explore, I think.
That's amazing. Okay, well, we are at the end of our time, and hold on. We do have one quick question that I'm going to squeeze in. Will it be possible, Arvin says, thank you for the inspiring talk, will it be possible to view and experience a chart from different perspectives or cameras? I believe seeing oneself going through the motions from a third-person view could bring in a new perspective to your data. What do you think?
So right now we design it to be a view on the virtual reality. So you could move out your head and move out on the cart on a funny angle, but at first person. As a third person in something that it was not really the plan at start. We were really focused on giving the virtual reality the focus. I'm not really sure about what could be gained from a third view perspective. I don't think you will have really the same sensation or the same feelings as you will do if you really immerse yourself into the cart and the roller coaster.
Great. I encourage everyone to read the paper. There are some more questions on Slido. You can continue this conversation in Discord. But now I am passing off the virtual mic to Arnaud, who's going to present the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Daria. So, I hope you can all hear me, as we all ask at the beginning of a video call. So I'm Arnaud Prouzeau. I'm I will be your chair for this section, which is Moria, Vision for and from the Future. And I'm from INRIA Bordeaux. And the first presentation will be made by Lonnie Besançon about the paper Dystopia into a Potential Future of IEEE VIS under Plan S. And Lonnie Besançon is with Linköping University. Lonnie, the floor is yours.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Is that working all right? Is it also working online? Just checking. Yeah, cool. So, hey everyone, I'm very happy to present today our paper on dystopian, the future of IEEE VIS under Plan S. I hope you got the pun in the title. I highlighted it just in case, which makes the pun not as funny anymore, but that's okay. So this presentation is going to talk mostly about open access. I'm sure you've seen this logo before. And Plan S is actually focusing on open access. So that's why I start with this. Let's just define first what it is. So what open access is, it means that actually your paper is available for all people that want to read it free of charge all over the world, right? And there's many, many advantages to this, most notably that taxpayers that actually pay our salary very often, well, they can actually access the research that we're producing and its results, but also that less economically advantaged institutions can build on our results and reuse them, right? And it was wildly put in place during COVID by for-profit publishers, but maybe, as we showed in one of my papers, it was probably open access washing on their side. So most of us in the community who've actually been knowing about open access before, we've made our papers very often publicly available as preprints on websites like HAL, Archive, or things like this. But it was never compulsory before. And the way we did it was that when we got the notice of acceptance of our paper, we would just upload it on one of these archiving websites, and that was it. And the people that really cared about that would give you this virtual cookie, and you'd be like, yay, I did it. Pretty cool. But Plan S is slightly more complicated than this, and it's really a whole bureaucratic monster to handle. So the plan actually states that with effect from 2021, all scholarly publications on the results from research funded by public or private grants provided by national, regional, and international research councils and funding bodies must be published in open access journals or open access platforms or made immediately available through open access repositories without embargo. So that was actually voted in 2018 by the European Research Council, Science Europe, and the Scientific Council. And in our paper, we envision and describe kind of a catastrophic view should IEEE and the VIS community not manage to reach an agreement that would make IEEE TVCG, where we publish, compliant with Plan S. So if that were to happen, a lot of authors from the VIS community would be excluded from submitting to IEEE VIS. You can see in this kind of like dystopic map of IEEE VIS authors. And we imagine that in this very catastrophic scenario, the attendance to VIS would also drop, right? Because people couldn't submit anymore. And this would lead eventually to the community splitting in two different research communities and a lot of wasted research effort because one, of the lack of awareness across communities of each other's work, two, the lack of collaborations between these two communities, and three, potential tensions on collaborations that already exist within the community on where to publish, right? Because some people will want TVCG and others would like, no, we can't do it. Fortunately, the situation is not so desperate, right? There's still many, many things we can do as a community and that we can hope for. In particular, a very easy to envision, although short-term solution lies within transformative agreements. So IEEE could reach an agreement with the institutions that have to be Plan S compliant, that in exchange for a slightly higher subscription fee, their affiliated researchers would be allowed to publish their work respecting the Plan S requirements. However, as I said, this is only a temporary solution, because if you read Principle 8 of Plan S, it is written that the funders do not support the hybrid model of publishing. However, as a traditional pathway towards full open access within a clearly defined time frame, and only as a part of transformative agreements, funders may contribute to financially supporting such arrangements. And these kind of agreements have already been made with specific universities in the past, so it is something that we could envision to work for the IEEE VIS community. But in any case, we wrote this paper to only raise awareness about Plan S, which is going to affect mostly Europe, and about the need for open access, and the fact that the issue does not concern actually only European researchers, right? It concerns the whole community in the end. But be assured that the VIS steering committee, the open practice chairs, and IEEE are actively working on the issue in the hope to solve it as soon as possible, so no one is left behind with this thing. But even if we manage to solve this very soon, raising awareness is actually important, because the issue might arise very soon in the future as well. If you read the statement and mandate from the White House that all US-funded research papers and data will have to be available immediately upon publications by 2026. This was not working? Okay. People couldn't hear me online? Good, that's done. I'm done anyway, so that was my last slide. Can you switch over to the Zoom? If you have questions, you need to ask them on Slido. I can't take questions physically.
Thanks a lot, Lonnie. Well, I think we can't hear you on the Zoom, though, so it's a bit complicated.
You didn't hear me at all.
But I think we can't hear you on the Zoom, though, so it's a bit complicated.
It is working. Yeah, it is also working. Can you hear me, Arno? Arno?
Can you speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
So the problem is I can't hear you on the Zoom, so I have to turn on YouTube, but then if I speak, then we have this Larsen effect, so it's a bit really sorry about that. I think it's a bit weird. We've been told that the live presentation are not streamed on Zoom, but
so maybe I should take physical questions
would be at least.
In the meantime.
Okay, let me check.
Can you tell them?
So we'll ask question, and sorry, I will not hear the answer, but at least everyone will hear the answer, so everyone else. So there's a question. Can you give some info on how many funding agencies in Europe are affected, considering not all sign up for Plan S?
How many are affected? I wouldn't know the numbers like this, but all the information is on the Plan S website. You can see all funding agencies' compliancy with Plan S. So I wouldn't be able to know like this on the top of my head, but it's really a lot of funding agencies are affected by this. Mostly across Europe. I think Germany is still not affected, and maybe Norway not either, but I think the others are. Also, that doesn't affect the UK, because there's a different agreement already reached between IEEE and the UK with UKRI. I don't know if you could hear that or no. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I just have to switch between Zoom and YouTube, but that's fine. There's a second question. Can you speak out the effects of having TVCG fully open access to the author?
Right. So, I don't know if you can hear me. There was a question
Sorry,
live that I'm going to repeat.
You didn't get the question?
I'm just going to repeat the question that I had live about open data policies at IEEE and what they mean, and that some people apparently didn't respect them, or the journal might not enforce them. I don't know, I haven't checked open data policies. I don't think there's any strict requirements of open data for any TVCG paper. So I'm not sure. Like, you can get a badge for producing your data and making it available, but I think that's pretty much the extent of it. There's no requirements upon publication to actually submit your data. Not as of now, anyways. I mean, I know this is compulsory in other fields, but this is not in ours. Sorry about that, Arno. This is quite complicated to handle. Yes.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a lot for your answer, and sorry for the small technical issue. Maybe we will stop here anyway for this presentation, and
I have another question live, Arno.
Except if there is a question inside in the room.
I have another question live, Arno.
If there is a question inside in the room.
Just a note on what we just discussed. So, because the funding agencies ask for us to publish in open access venues, or having our papers open access, but the issue there is that we also have this open access fees, and so that needs to be considered when I'm also from Europe, so our European Union funding agencies ask for open access, but then we also need to pay these open access fees, because in our field, the top venues and journals are not open access per se.
Yes, so that's one of the things that Planet specifies, is that if the journal is asking you to pay for open access, then that's not a viable solution, right? So the idea behind this is that they want publishers pretty much to stop being for profit, I guess, eventually, though that would not happen anytime soon. But agreements have to be reached in ways that works beyond this. So I think as of now, you can still get, for instance, your university library to pay for the open access fees if they have the money. That's one way of doing it, but that wouldn't work long term. So yeah, that's indeed one of the issues. And I mean, to be fair, if you look at some other journals that are like not the IEEE VIS community, but like more like people that publish in Nature and all of these things, the fees are just absolutely crazy, right? Like the open access publishing at Nature is $12,000. And surprisingly, they publish a paper saying that they're a bit surprised that countries from lower income don't publish in Nature open access. What a surprise. But yeah, this is one of the issues for real. There's no clear solution on this as of now, which is a problem, which is why we actually wanted to talk about this today, just so people are aware of this. There's also the other requirements. You should really check the Planes website. They detail all the requirements and how this works. I think this is quite important.
Thank you. Let's give our speaker another round of applause. Let's go to that. Okay, yeah, I guess. And now we'll go to our next
thanks
speaker,
a lot, Lonnie. And again, sorry about the question micmac. Our next presentation will be by Victor Schettinger from TU Wien, and he will present the paper "I Learned to Diffuse" or Data Alchemy 101, a mnemonic manifesto. Victor, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, also.
Okay, cool. So, as I said, I'm going to be presenting my paper, I Learned to Diffuse, our paper with my friends, our Data Alchemy 101, and Mnemonic Manifesto. So this is what the paper looks like. In this paper, we kind of construct a scientific narrative around the idea of data alchemy and text-to-image generation, structured in 10 theses. Our goal was like more or less talk about storytelling and transdisciplinarity and visualization, But I will not go over the thesis here because I don't have enough time and it would not be a good treatment. So instead, I'll actually tell you the story of this idea of data alchemy. And I think it's a clear thing for you to understand where it's at. So this is the actual paper that inspired me. It's available from 2019. The authors in this paper, what they did was they gathered around 3 million abstracts from material science literature, and they run it through some machine learning like magic and crunched this into a model. And after it was done, it started spitting a lot of very astounding knowledge about material science. And well, now this might not look that impressive after we have GPT for a couple of years, but at the time it was very impressive. It was able to find out properties we did not know, we knew about materials, and it was able to predict future research even, according to some experiments that they did. And what really got me like shocked and thinking was that they only used the abstracts of the papers for this. So it's as if the abstract could stand for the paper as a distilled form of the scientific knowledge it represented. And when you think about it, this actually does make sense because we have a phenomena out there in nature. We have big stuff, small stuff, inner stuff, outer stuff. And when we engage this through science with our scientific approaches, we measure, we test it. And when we come back, we tell stories about this. And these are our papers. And even if different fields will have different discourse, different methodologies and narratives, in the end, it's all more or less the same. You say, hey, I did this. Why did I do this? There's an explanation why it was this important. Who did this before me? Exactly how I did it. What happened when I did it? Why I think those things happen, and why I should care what you should do in the future. So when we think about it, then it's obvious. Like a good abstract should have all of these elements in one paragraph succinctly expressed. So when we then aggregate this sort of collection of millions and millions of abstracts, this is the sort of huge scientific mythology that we have. And when we crunch this, again, with some machine learning magic, we have this sort of model of material science reality that can actually stand up for the real thing somehow. And we can then, instead of going and aiming science at the outside world, we can aim at inside of these models and sort of simulate. We have this loop that is formed. And this was the original loop I had in mind when I was thinking some years ago about data alchemy. This idea that now that we have this placeholder for reality that came through text is not something they program implicitly, the simulation of reality. It's based on our narrative descriptions of reality, and we can sort of explore it in place. So why do I use the word alchemy? Where does alchemy have to do with this? Because alchemists were trying to do more or less the same thing with the technology of their time. They were trying to organize all these narratives of knowledge and experimentation with their available media, which was paper, pen, and the brain. No machine learning, maybe some black magic. But for the alchemists, the nature of reality is sign producing. So in the universe is ultimately a combinatorial game of science that is expressing itself through materiality. This is kind of important, so I'm going to repeat. So the idea is that for alchemists, the nature of reality is sign producing, and the universe is ultimately a combinatorial game of science that is expressing itself through materiality. Right? So we have external science, but we also have internal science, and even today it's hard to tell them apart, especially when you have culture in the mix, because culture is like this huge sort of latent space for science, and it structures itself in this even sometimes unnoticeable mnemonics. So now when we bring this to text image generation, and we try to make a parallel with data alchemy, so instead of using abstracts of material science, we're using another type of data of compressed knowledge, where we have sort of symbolic knowledge. These models, they are trained with pairs of image and text. For instance, here, painting of a beautiful house, and there's a painting of a beautiful house, and cheese, and there's a photo of a lot of cheese. And when again, we have a lot of this data, more than 3 million in the absolute, like a lot of this, and we bring again our machine learning black magic to sort of distill this into a model. We are able to, after the model is trained, after we have this thing, we're able to bring it up in our diffusion machinery. We can bring it to the table and start putting things together. So we have the latent model. And diffusion models kind of run on noise. It's a way to say it. It's a bit more complicated than that, but it's like some sort of like magic. And when we put all these things together, we kind of have this machinery. There's always new versions. It's always changing. It's very hard to keep up. But the important point is that now we can plug some text. We can plug a prompt, and it will spit out an image. So if I say photo of a very ugly house made of cheese, it will produce this image that very likely was never seen by anyone before. It was never produced before. Maybe someone could have the same luck, putting the same prompt, the same seed to produce it, but it's very unlikely. And more than that, if I keep prompting the same thing, it will give me infinite variations of this thing, which makes us think that it really does know something about ugliness, about houseness, about cheesiness. And this is just like Joe Wood was saying before, there's so much potential for exploring this thing. So the same way that we could use this sort of data alchemy thinking that maybe we'll try to explore material reality through these models of material science. What can we learn if we try to explore these models that we're having now? What can we learn about ourselves? I don't think we need to wait until this technology is well polished, until it sparkles, so that we can start exploring these angles. And this is why we wrote this paper, and this is sort of the general idea that I want to put out to the VIS community. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. And really, this paper is nothing without the Moodle board and without your attention of exploring it. Because when we released this was before Stable Diffusion, we have put out another comic to sort of cover these things. Here's sort of a spoiler of it, and it's hidden inside the Moodle board. You kind of have to work your way around it, finding it. But I really hope you do and go for it, because I think it's really cool.
Well, thanks a lot, Victor, for this presentation. I really encourage everyone to have a look at the mirror board, because it's actually quite cool and quite interesting. There is actually a question about the public availability of the slide. So I guess this is more a question for us and for the author per se, but it would be good if we could put the slide on the webpage if the presenter agree with it.
Yeah,
and then the QR code would be available directly. Mm-hmm. So is there any question in the audience, in the in-person audience? All right. Then while we're waiting for question on Slido or on the audience, I will have a first question, which is about the example that you gave with this house, with this ugly house made of cheese. Yeah. It's actually interesting because the concept of ugly is definitely subjective. You can't really put a clear image on top of it. So did you actually try to just type the query house made of cheese, and was the result different than the result with the word ugly put in it? And do you think it has an impact on your result?
Yeah, I tried a bit, and all of those things, you kind of have to generate a sort of a large sample to notice this subtleties, this why is associating to ugly. It was not particular. I think I made just sound like a good example because I used beautiful and then as sort of another thing. But some of these words definitely in some of these models you can see, like beautiful especially is one that everyone uses, and it definitely affects the result. But in the end, it's really how they are labeled on this data set. And again, like I said, like the moment we decide, oh no, we're going to take this thing seriously, we're going to label these things in a meaningful way, then this is even more interesting, like you said, because we can bring our subjectiveness to evaluation.
Okay, I'm checking in the Slido. So I will have another question. So we are, I mean, this technology of text to image is something that has been booming in the last few months, and we've all been dreaming of using it to create new visualization. With your experience, do you think actually we could use, well, all of this knowledge with all of this image database, but maybe add database with data visualization and actually had spit out new visualization of data that we would not think about with this type of technology? Do you think there is a
absolutely
there?
Yeah. I've been exploring some of these things. Like right now, these models are very limited. If you try to use like simple words like data visualization, etc., it would just be things that it saw that are just look like random dashboards. But you can play around and especially use some form of input. A lot of these methods accept, for instance, that you bring an image in. So you can, for instance, generate an output from a data set that you're using the area to encode something, and then you use this sort of to transform. But you always get to this thing that if you're transforming this, you're going to lose precision. You know, it becomes tricky. But definitely, I think that pretty soon we're going to be able to do this. I've been experimenting a lot, and you can see, at least in the sense of constructing visual metaphors and of building something, it helps, because I'm definitely no designer and I'm really bad at even Photoshop, and I managed to put up all these things together. So,
all right. Okay, so, well, thanks a lot, Victor, for this great presentation. As I said before, really go have a look at the Miro board. It's really cool, and we'll have our last speaker for this session, which is Tatiana Lozev. She will present the paper Me Ifesto for Visualization Empowerment in Teaching and Learning, and she's a PhD student at the School of Interactive Art and Technology at Simon Fraser University. Well, Tatiana, you can start your presentation. Sorry, Tatiana, we can't hear you. I think you're on mute. We may be experiencing a few technical issues. Tatiana, you are Sorry, Tatiana, we don't have the sound. You may need to reshare your screen and tick the box that you're also sharing the sound with it.
I will use data visualization as a process to develop meaningful questions in both teaching and learning.
To think deeply, creatively, critically,
We acknowledge the variety of solutions in teaching visualization.
I will empower people from diverse backgrounds to embrace the uncertainties
their responsibility
and leverage them
express
to think
it,
models and their outputs.
I want to support learners in understanding the process of designing data visualizations and get to know different tools they can use out of the university context. I believe that visualization is both a process and an outcome.
Les humains que je rencontre à construire.
I want to enable learners to think out of the box and realize how they can leverage previous provide information by demonstrating reasonable and give them a chance to expand their horizons.
The need for the students eagerness to learn, the passion to explore, and capabilities to create.
To spreading the idea that data visualization
I'm enthusiastic about visualization and spark enthusiasm.
that can and should include I value teaching students the ethics of conducting research, including learning and contribution, particularly when working in an
Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana Losev, and I'll be presenting on behalf of my co-authors today on manifestos for visualization, empowerment, in teaching and learning. You just heard some manifesto statements being read out loud, and I look forward to telling you about the manifesto exercise, and we hope that you'll try it out for yourselves. This summer, it all started here, at Schloss Dagstuhl in Germany's Saarland. Our group gathered for a workshop where we imagined a shared vision, maybe a manifesto, on visualization empowerment, how to teach and learn data visualization. What do you imagine empowerment might look like? Is it democratizing online open data sets, spur community, conversations, share VIS research for free? Maybe it's broadening data viz skills, make them more common and accessible. This is a prompting question, really. It's where we started and then realized we need to dive deeper. We learned that the meaning of empowerment looks so different for each person, and one manifesto does not represent this diversity. It's important to understand what empowerment means to ourselves and to members of the VIS community before we work alongside the different people whom we aim to empower. So first, we needed to understand what empowerment meant to all of us in data viz. We developed a self-reflective exercise that we're excited to share with you today called manifesto. It's a way to explore meanings of empowerment in personal teaching practices in data viz. We learned that it has the potential to empower the teachers and the learners, which you'll hear about shortly. But let me tell you how we developed the manifesto and how you could try it out too and join in. We began by looking at different manifestos out there. We thought about their contents, compared their approaches, and decided what they taught us about ourselves, our own experiences and attitudes, and how they resonated with us. We acknowledge that manifestos can be harmful and exclude people and disrupt. They aim to set a set of principles that many people should follow, and that was not our aim. We wanted a manifesto that was deeply personal, meaningful, fluid, and be iterated upon. Manifesto here is both a reflective process and an outcome, which is a commitment statement or a manifesto statement at the end of the process. And that's what you heard at the beginning of the presentation. We asked ourselves, what do we want to empower people to do in VIS? And how can we best do that? And what does best mean anyway? We used this thinking to draft individual visualization manifestos or personal commitments about how to empower others through data visualization. Self-reflection helped us better understand one another and ourselves as teachers and learners in ways that surprised us. We found this activity to be incredibly freeing, reflexive, and thought-provoking. It was a learning exercise for and about ourselves as teachers. So instead of creating one common manifesto, like we thought we might, instead we created a shared collection of value statements and commitments. We found that sharing the statements brought us together from across our diverse practices and backgrounds. We took some time, thought some more, and then shared these drafts with one another. What surprised us was how revealing the discussions were about our own values and desires for the world. We learned about different perspectives by reading others' manifesto statements and inspired us to iterate on our own. This helped us gain clarity about why we cared about empowering people with data viz and what we might do to prioritize to do so. Though our goal was to empower learners, we found that this activity gave the time and permission of oneself as a teacher in VIS to focus on individual values and goals by being explicit, listening to others, and seeing other perspectives in the community. This is really important as it may help with empowering others through teaching and can be a device to use to empower learners too. We'd like to try this out in other contexts and hear how this worked for other people. This was such a positive experience that we want to discuss with you, the folks that make up the VIS community. This is the manifesto guide from our paper. It begins with stop and grab a coffee. We offer playful guides for self-reflection on empowerment in your teaching practice. It takes about an hour. We even have a contribution in our paper from one of the anonymous AltViz reviewers. Do you have a manifesto? We invite you to see what it's like for you. Let us know what it did for you. Did it empower you? Might it empower your learners? Join us on Twitter. Make the first version of your MeFesto if you'd like and tweet with your name, affiliation with hashtags AltBiz, MeFesto, IEEE VIS. At the end, we will collate and add the Twitter contributions to our paper.
So thanks a lot for this presentation. And so, well, everyone don't hesitate either in the room or online to either ask a question or send your manifesto, and we can then share it directly with us or share it on Twitter. In the meantime, I guess I will have a question, or if there is none in the audience. In the end, could we? So you definitely start the definition of manifesto in contradiction a bit with a manifesto, which is made and decided by a group. But could we consider that people with a similar manifesto could actually form a manifesto? And so a manifesto in this sense would be some kind of group of people with the same manifesto.
Yeah, I believe that's possible. I think we just wanted to make the distinction that this is the intention behind the manifesto is not fellowship. It's more as a self-reflective exercise, as a way to share practices, values, but specific to how to empower people through teaching and learning, data visualization.
Thanks a lot. There's a question from Alper Sarikaya. He's curious about how much the empowerment touch on the utility or the ease of use of visualization creation tools. What's your thought about that? What would be your thought?
Yeah, so of course that could be one of the things that might be empowering, but our focus was more on really exploring personal values, motivations, on what empowerment means to oneself and what that looks like when you teach a classroom or if you teach in industry, because there are people from diverse backgrounds. And so we didn't really touch on what will empowerment look like through specific actions. It was more, again, looking deeply at your teaching philosophy and your approach.
Okay. Well, I guess so we'll have time for maybe one more question. So you mainly mentioned manifesto as a way for the teacher and the teacher in data visualization to reflect. Is this also something that could be included in a curriculum to have the students also being part of this reflection? Is this something that you discussed with your co-author?
Yes, and it's also in our paper. It's certainly an idea, and it's worth trying out. We are curious about what that might be like.
All right. Well, thanks a lot again for this presentation. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to all the presenters of this session. It was really, really interesting. Lots of very insightful papers. And I believe now we have a coffee break. So we'll do a 30 minutes break and we'll be back with a session about playful tricks and VIS in unexpected places.